Well, hello everybody. It's great to be with you here on video for the Hearing God course. I'm excited for this because of how critical this is in our lives. Just to start with a quick story, I remember being 17 and being in my car in the parking lot of Christian Publications bookstore, which some of you might remember. And I remember dealing with anger and a lot of this pain and brokenness in my life. And I went into the bookstore, I bought this anger management book. And I brought it out and I started flipping through it. And the thing made me so angry that I threw it across the car. And it was this moment where I called out to God. And I had to ask him. And I was actually talking to him and saying, God, I can't do this anymore. I need your help. There's no way I'm going to be a husband one day, or a father, or even someone who can follow you or be normal in this life if I don't have your help. Please help me. So I called out to him. And this was one of these first moments where I heard God speak in my life very clearly. And he spoke to me and he told me a few things that I can be doing and looking into and working on, and that began my healing journey in my life. And so hearing God is critical. It was critical for me, it still is today, and it's critical for each of us as we walk this life with Jesus. And that's why I'm excited about this course. All right, so let me walk you through some of the foundational elements of why we're doing this. All right, and the first is the principle of disciple making. All right, so we're going to throw a picture up here, and you can see a whole bunch of these little circles. And these are principles of who a disciple is and what they lean into. And you can see that listening is one of them. See, listening is a key and critical principle of being a disciple because it leans into all these other areas where we can start to ask God, God, what are you calling me to deal with in my life so I can be free? God, what are you asking me to do so I can be on mission? God, who are you asking me to serve so I can serve well in my neighborhood? And so listening is this key and critical piece, and one of the first ones that we need to lean into. Now let me read from John 10:27. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. That is amazing news, that we would hear Jesus' voice and know his call, and that we can operate every day in this reality. Matthew 4:18-20 and 5:1-2 says, one day as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. And Jesus called out to them, come, follow me. I'm going to show you how to fish for people. And so they left their nets at once and followed him. And one day as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up to a mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him, and he began to teach them. See, the very first thing that those disciples did was to sit at the feet of their master and to listen. They took this posture of listening. They wanted to learn from their master. They wanted to hear from him. And as disciples who are called to make disciples, we are to do the same. To know how to listen to God's voice and to teach others to do the same. In fact, our discipling definition here at Rock Point is a disciple listens to God, obeys, and then teaches others to do the same. It's all about learning and experiencing for us, and then being able to teach others. So here's a few other things I want to walk through. A couple other principles of why this course is so important and why we're so glad that you are a part of it. The first is for equipping. All right, what I just mentioned, that it isn't just for you. And I want you to be thinking about this throughout, that we want you to experience for yourself, but also how is it that I can teach someone else this principle of listening for God's voice. And throughout the course, we're going to be teaching you some simple tools that are easy to pass on to others. A second principle here is the principle of experiencing. Is that we don't just want to fill your head with knowledge. These videos will have some teaching, but we want to lean you into moments of practicum and moments of experiencing and experimenting for yourself. So you get a chance to actually try this stuff out and to listen to God's voice for yourself. And thirdly is the principle of community, that we don't just do this alone or in isolation. You might be watching this video alone, but a lot of the working out of this course is going to be done in community when we gather each week together in a big group and maybe even in smaller groups at that big group. So we can together be saying, hey, here's where it was difficult. Here's what I don't understand. Here's what God said to me. It's an encouragement to one another. And this is how this is supposed to happen, actually. As you walk through the Gospels, the disciples were a group of 12. In Acts 2, the new believers were a church that gathered in community. This whole thing should be done with one another. So make sure that you're not just using these videos, but that you're gathering with us so we can work this out with you and learn together. Now, here's some practical stuff that you need to know in terms of our schedule. Week 1 is identity and intimacy. That's who God is, who we are, and the kind of life that we're invited into. Week 2 is word and spirit, giving us more of a theological foundation and understanding for listening to God's voice. Week 3 is anticipation and expectancy, more of a posture of how we are to listen to God. And then week 4, our final week, is the forming life. And that's this invitation into what does it look like now? As we leave this course, what are we called to? What kind of a life are we called to? Now, session structure, you'll get a little bit of teaching pretty much on a daily basis through video. You'll get a practicum, which I'll talk about at each video, but also you'll have a little bit of a participant's guide where it'll list that for you. And that's a way you can begin experiencing and experimenting with this for yourself. And then also we'll have our gathered times once a week. And there's going to be lots of different faces up here in the videos. All right, myself and Ruth Ann Gilbertson are going to be your main teachers, but there's lots of different teachers who are going to teach you on these videos because they've got different stories. They have different experiences. They have different takes on this. And I think there's a richness to each of us hearing from many different people on what listening to God actually looks like. So, you've probably got this in your participant's guide, but I'm going to read through this anyway. Here's your first practicum that I want you to lean into today. So practicum number 1, take a few minutes to silently reflect. Pick a time when it's good for you, when there's a bit of quietness, when you can get away for about 10 or 15 minutes. Ask these questions. When did you first realize that you needed to come to Jesus? And what led you to make that decision? So think on that. Now, what were the circumstances involved? What was happening in your life? What were you processing inwardly or emotionally? And what were you feeling or what were you thinking at that time? See, in John 6:44, Jesus says, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them to me." You couldn't have made this decision without having been called by God, without having heard His voice. So reflecting on that, how would you describe how Jesus was calling out to you and calling you to Himself? All right, write down everything you're discovering. Write down all your thoughts, and then you're going to want to bring those with you to our gathered time. So that's the end of our time together today. So thanks for joining us, and then make sure you dig into video number 2 tomorrow.